on my door to my office, on the other side of my typewriter with the giant tongue coming out, there's a quote that I stole from somewhere and I have no idea where. And I kind of look at it every time I come into my office, and it says, "Agitation gives birth to creation." And I think about that a lot in terms of like the creative process, because, you know, a lot of times as writers, we're not sort of like coming to the page because we have some like grand idea or like this marvelous thought or like this, like these worlds coming in on whole cloth. Instead, we come to the page because something is bugging us, right? Something is just bugging the spit out of us. And so it becomes like the piece of sand in the oyster, right? And that we just start to like turn around and start to like add things and add things and add thought until it becomes something no longer sharp and irritating, but possibly priceless, right? So for you, what was the sand in the oyster that started this ball rolling for you?
I mean, first of all, I love that analogy. That is such a great way to put it. I love that. So the sand in the oyster was like a really big piece of grit, actually. It was not some delicate little piece of sand. It was a giant piece of grit. And it was that partially, there was like a long part and a short part. The long part was that every February, my kids deal with, Black History Month, and it's always the same historical characters over and over again.
Yeah.
And there's only so many times we can learn about the same thing, like over and over again. Plus, there's like misinformation, and then you have to like correct the information later on, like the information that they got when they were really little. Rosa Parks was really tired. And then later on, they're like, oh, it wasn't that she was tired. She was like an actual activist, like the whole time, so it's all with that sort of thing.
In my book in grade school, they showed her as an old
right?
woman.
She was
right?
like 30.
Her knees were killing her.
Oh my God, this poor old lady in her 30s. Anyhow, but so that was the sort of the long thing. That was the bit of grit. And then the shorter thing was that it was 2017, February 1st, 2017. So the previous administration, the president had gone to a Black History Month breakfast and clearly knew nothing about Black history. And it was just an embarrassment. And so a lot of writers like me, who are former teachers, decided to do a bunch of blog posts, to give educators information about Black history and so on. But again, it was the same characters, right? It's, it's Martin Luther King Jr., it's Sojourner Truth, it's, it's the same people all over again. So I did a very quick Google search and found out about some people just a few facts, maybe it was less than 10, about people, what they were doing before Africans were enslaved, and I called it Africans Before Slavery. And so that was my blog post contribution for the day. And then our editor, Elise Howard, she saw it, and she saw that people were responding to it. And she said, hey, do you want to make this into a book? And I thought, yeah, how hard could that be? Yeah. Famous last words.
Yeah.
Yeah. You saw me struggle with this whole thing the whole time, right? Like, because you were in on it from the moment Elise asked. I came on our little chat, and I was like,
oh, what is happening? I really want to wait a minute.
Exactly.
It's like in some ways, I think, like, we talk about the stages of grief, like there's also the stages of research, I think bargaining is also in there in both of them.
Oh, bargaining is for sure in there. Despair is in there a lot, like several times, right?
Yeah.
Like you research something and you're like, yes, I will find this thing. And then you go down the rabbit hole and you're like, oh, this rabbit hole is garbage.
Right.
How did I get this rabbit hole? It's kind of like there were so many times I felt like, do you remember that that Geraldo looking for the, what was it? He was going to open a safe that belonged to some gangster. I can't remember who it was. And he's like, it was like a live show.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, there's a live show. Geraldo's going to uncover this safe that's filled with whatever of this gangster. And then he opens it and then there's nothing.
That's hysterical.
On a live show. But there were a lot of research days that were like,
yeah. What were some of the more fruitful avenues for you? Like what were some of the places where you did research that like maybe that were instrumental for you or opened up new doors for you?
It was mostly asking people, honestly, like, I'm not a researcher at all. And so I just literally the first thing I did was go to librarians that I knew and was like, okay, I got to write this book. Help?
Yeah.
Giant question mark. And people would say, oh, go here, do this, try this, try the other, try the next. And people were really great about sharing information with me about various things. Other writers that I knew who, knew various things and knew that I was working on this book would occasionally send me random things. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, there was this one piece of information that I got about Mwana Nkisi, who founded Mombasa. Mm-hmm. And that came from a friend of mine who knew that I was writing this book. And he was like, have you looked into Mwana Nkisi yet? I was like, no, I have not. And so, then I started digging around there and I found a few things. But a lot of it was like that. One of them was going to the Met. I brazenly emailed one of the curators at the Met and asked if she had, and I said, I'm doing this book and, I'm looking for information. And she invited me to meet her at the Met, and she like walked me around and like basically narrated, mm-hmm. All their curated items for mm-hmm. like an hour and a half.
Art historians are amazing. Honestly, like I think art historians are, from a writer's point of view, are possibly like they're these treasure troves.
It was gold. It was gold for sure, because she also knew it was not just that, here's the object, here's the information about the object, but she also knew kind of like the story behind the object,
context around it, and like and sort of where it sits, like not only sort of like from like history, but also culture too.
Right. Yeah.
Fascinating.
But it started that too. That was one of the earliest research trips that I had. And that too helped me to understand kind of the overarching thing for the entire book, mm-hmm. Which was that Africans and Europeans were very closely connected and had been closely connected for thousands of years. And the information that we have been given was wrong. The information that when Europeans started colonizing African countries and taking out the resources out of Africa, including human beings, mm-hmm. the information that we were given was that there was nothing there. There was no culture. There was nothing. But the truth is that they had these lengthy relationships. They had been trading with each other. They had diplomatic relations. They, knew how to talk to each other. They knew each other's languages. So that was the thing that was the very first connection to that for me, was that trip to the Met. And it was when I saw there were two sculptures, a male figure and a female figure standing side by side, carved out of wood, but they were covered in these glass beads, and the glass beads were Venetian. Wow. And I was like, wait, so they knew, like they knew to go to Venice for glass? Like, I don't understand, like, what's happening? She's like, well, they knew each other. They traded with each other. Like, the glass beads came down from Venice because that's what they wanted to use. I'm like, wait. So like we're going back and forth with these things. She's like, yeah. And they would use the glass beads and they would send them to Africa and they would make things with it. And they would send them back and sell them in Europe. And I was just like,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was when I started to understand
Mhm.
that the story that we've all been told really was completely incorrect.
Mhm.
And that's when I started being able to build the story about the relationships that happened. And there are a lot of relationships, like in all of the, when you look at all of the icons, there often are relationships outside of their own countries, often going either into the Middle East or into Europe.